I'm back again with an unoriginal video, and I'm going to call it yet another top five or my next top five or something like that. You can imagine it as 6 through 10 of the cars that I would love to have one day. Number 10 on my list is actually two cars. I'm going to treat them as the same. I would love to have both, but they're my number 10. And you have to dial back to the early 90s when GMC, otherwise known as Chevy, made two cars that I think are badass. And I have never been in one. I think I've seen one of them once. A buddy of mine has one. I need to get over there and check it out. But they are the early 90s GMC Cyclone and GMC Typhoon. For those who don't know, these were all-wheel drive cars. They were 4.3 liter turbo, and essentially they came out at a time that I had a 91 GT Mustang, and the Cyclone was light, was all-wheel drive, and was a turbo monster for the time. The Typhoon and Cyclone each had 280 horsepower at the crank, and they each had 350 torque at the crank as well. And this is back in a time when like mid 200s horsepower was high, and anything over 300 foot-pounds of torque was like crazy. And these were all-wheel drive cars, which again, back in that time was amazing to have that package all in one. And again, the weight of these things, that Typhoon less so, but the Cyclone for sure, made them absolute monsters on the street. As far as production numbers go too, they're attainable, they're out there. The Cyclones, I see it go between say 20 grand and 40 grand depending on miles. I'm not going to be picky. I'm looking for honestly a black one. I think the Cyclones only came in black, but the Typhoons had an array of colors. I would be fine with just a black Cyclone, of which they made 3,000, I think. And the Typhoon's a little easier to find, although they had multiple colors. A black Typhoon is fine with me. I believe they made 4,700 Typhoons over a few year period. But that's my number 10 pick, and they are a badass set of cars. Number 9 is another 80s car, and I'm by no means an expert on these cars. I'm an enthusiast, and I like looking at these things, and I know folks out there have a lot more knowledge than I. So don't kill me too bad if I butcher some of the specs here. But my next pick for number 9 is a Grand National, and not just any Grand National, but the 87 Grand National GNX. It was a 3.8 liter turbo, and honestly was one of the fastest production cars at the time, if not the fastest. But the GNX was like top dog in terms of the GM cars at that time, speed wise, and it beat a lot of European cars as well. But the point is, it's this black looking sinister car, and I believe one of the ads at the time said if Darth Vader had, a car, he would pick the Grand National. And it is. It's one of those cars that's kind of timeless. It kind of always looks good. It always looks like it's performant. And even if you're not into cars, you look at one and you get the feeling that it can do something special. They only made 547, and I've been looking, and I bid on one a couple of days ago. Did not win. Was not willing to go the full distance. But I am in the market right now for a GNX. To give you an idea on how badass the GNX was, again, the Cyclone and Typhoon had 280 horsepower and 350-ish foot-pounds of torque. The GNX, for its day, and this is like 5 years prior or 4 years prior to the Cyclone Typhoon, had 300 horsepower and hit 400 foot-pounds of torque. So again, an absolute beast for the time. One more note on the GNX that I think is kind of cool. Being from Michigan here in southeastern Michigan, we're used to the big three car companies, and seeing test cars around and knowing that in various industrial parks and buildings around the area, things are being done. Where I'm at right now in this DDX headquarters location is in Livonia, Michigan, and the actual spot where the Buick Regals entered McLaren and got upfitted to be a Grand National or a GNX is literally like a mile and a half behind me. And it's just kind of cool that the building is no longer McLaren. It's cool that this history lives in this area. And it's another reason that I think the GNX and the Grand Nationals in general are cool because, they had to, like Roush and like the other aftermarketers, they had to go to somebody outside of GM. And it was a smaller shop back then, and they were essentially building these things by hand, taking Regals and making them GNXs. So again, just kind of cool, little tidbit. Number 8 on my list is a car I know a little more about. We're back into the Corvettes with number 8. So I had gone over last time wanting the Night Race Blue, of which they made, I think, 51 or 50 something, if memory serves. Before I get to my number, actually, no, let's go ahead. My number 8 pick is the 2009 Atomic Orange Corvette ZR1. This is a one of 35. So they made 35 of these in '09 only, and it is a really, really cool color. You see them in Z06s a lot, and it's kind of the metallic, darker, burnt orange. And I've never seen one of these in person. I've seen pictures of a very, very few. You just don't see them very often. I know there's some lore around the color at GM. They were test cars or something, but I forget, to be honest. If anybody can comment, that would be awesome. I would love to know more about it. But '09 was the first run for the Corvette ZR1, and so it was an '09 only color. I had somebody today comment on my night race blue, wanting to get that car, and the comment was essentially like, "Hey, that's going to be a tough find. They only made 50 something of them," and that's true. But what I haven't shown you guys, and I'll get a video up at some point here, is in the meantime, between my last video and this one, I was able to pick up the rarest Corvette ZR1 out there, except for that Le Mans blue one I mentioned in the last video, which is a one of one. The rarest that you could actually get reasonably was the Carlisle blue, and I'll stick a picture up right now. But the Carlisle blue was a one of 11, and I was able to find a Carlisle blue in Dallas, Texas, about 2 months ago, and picked it up and drove it home. It was a higher mile vehicle, so my son and I drove back from Dallas. It was a great time. And yeah, I've got essentially the rarest of the rare in terms of colors for the ZR1. And I'm still looking though for for an atomic orange and a night race blue for that matter. So nothing special beyond the color of that car. And I'm still kind of in my Corvette color collecting kick on the ZR1s. I'd like to get the rest of the blues being the night race blue and the rest of the oranges being atomic orange. And I would be a happy dude. So again, my number 8 in '09 atomic orange ZR1. In my last top 5 video, I went over the E39 M5, and that was, I believe I wanted an '03, but I'd seen it in the early 2000s, '01 or so at the auto show. And I still want that car, and it's still in my top 5. But more recently, I was reminded a client of mine back in the early 2000s had brand new a E38 BMW 750 IL. And for those who don't know, the 7 Series is kind of like your bigger sedan, and the 750 was kind of like the top dog. I think they had a 760, but it was for special purpose stuff, maybe even limousine. The 750s, though, were like your top of the line of the 7 Series. And so to give you an example, the 740 IL, and the I believe, means fuel injected, and the L means the long wheelbase. So it was a kind of an extra long car to give you some more room in the back. And it's funny, even the manual shows how you can fit 4 sets of golf clubs into the trunk of the 750 and 740 ILs. The 740 IL is the same footprint car, meaning like it looks from the outside looks about the same. And the ILs have the same, I believe, wheelbase and dimensions in general. But the 740 came with a V8, and I believe it was a 4.4 liter V8 with 200 and something horsepower, high 200s horsepower. These weren't meant to be performance cars, but they did give them some power just to move all the weight around. The 750s, however, were a V12. They were, I believe, a 5.4 V12, which back when this client of mine had this and he was explaining it to me, I was just like, mind boggled, because it was a 6-figure car back in 2001 and '02. And then he had mentioned, and I don't know if this is true, and he was not a car guy, but had mentioned it had multiple oil filters. I think he said 4, and I could be wrong. And so oil changes were some, ridiculous amount of money at the time. But it's just all around, it's all around cool car, one. But you often see it back in those days as like either the hero's car or the villain's car, and like the Bond movies, they were featured in the Bond movies.
Your new BMW 750.
All the usual refinements, machine guns, rockets, the GPS tracking system.
And a bunch of other movies, they become like the car of choice for typically, the villain, because they look kind of mean and they're big, and you can deck them out with wheels and make them look super, super good. I'll post some during my spiel here, pictures that I just found online that I think are badass, and they look modern to this day, to be honest. A little bit of nostalgia there, but honestly, they're a good looking car in general. And I'm going back and forth. Like, I'm not set on the 750. It would be nice to have the V12, but the V8 would probably be fine. It's essentially a very similar car. The 750's got some interior amenities that are different. It's got more leather, I think, but stuff that's not super important. But I would just like to get one, make the paint look really good, deck it out with some wheels, get the stance correct, and probably stick a stereo into it because I'm that kind of nerd. But again, that's my number 7 pick is a 01 750 IL from BMW. Like the GNX, my number 6 car is a car that I know some about, but I'm not an expert. So by all means, correct me. I learned about this car honestly just last year, which is funny because I'm kind of a C6 Corvette fanatic. While I knew the C6R existed as a race car, I didn't think twice about there being some street version that could be available beyond, say, something like a Z06 here or a ZR1, which is next to me. So when I saw on Jay Leno's garage the C6 RS, I was kind of enamored by it, and it would be a badass car to have at number 6. I don't know if it's attainable. I've seen one sell, I think, for low hundreds, but I mean, as these cars are so rare, I believe they only made 7 or 10 C6 RSs. It may be in the unattainable realm, like that Le Mans Blue ZR1 is. Anyway, on to specs and stuff. So the C6 RS started out its life as a C6 Z06. So you would buy a Z06, and then you could option it via Pratt & Miller, who built the C6R, as a C6 RS. And what that meant was you could take it from its base, whatever a Z06 costed in the mid 2000s, whatever 09 plus. You could take it and then ship it to Pratt & Miller. And they had a number of options. I don't know every single option, but I do know that they had an option to take the LS7, the 6.2 LS7, that's 505 horsepower, and option it to a K-Tech, and K-Tech's who's building the motors for some of my other Corvettes, because they're local as well, just in Michigan here. You could get a K-Tech 8.2 liter, a 500 cubic inch, 8.2 liter naturally aspirated motor put into it. And I've read that it started as a 600-pound block of aluminum and ended up as an 8.2 liter monster that yielded 600 foot-pounds of torque and 600 horsepower. So again, naturally aspirated. I've read that was a $40,000 option above and beyond. I think it was $100K to get a C6 RS. I'm assuming that includes the cost of the Z06 because they redid interior stuff, they redid suspension, they had some body elements. It was a different hood, different fenders, aero for track use. But you could option this 8.2 liter monster at $40K. And then I heard as well, I've never seen one, and I haven't heard too much more about it other than one article online that you could option a supercharged version for like another 100 and something thousand bucks. So I'm assuming if you catch one of those, it's the supercharged, whatever, 8.2 liter version, that it's going to be out of this world price wise. But you can catch, I'm sure, the 8.2s for cheaper, and then if it's just a standard LS7 with whatever mods they did, it may be in the attainable category, for folks. Anyways, though, the cool part is it's almost like it's a Z06 on steroids, sure, but it's like a level above the ZR1, and it's still NA. Granted, the ZR1 had 640 horsepower, but still, I still kind of put it, one above the ZR1 just because they kind of topped out the interior and topped out the aero and topped out the look of the car and the stance and the, under the hood obviously as well. So again, just a badass all around car. I hope they made more than 7. I've read they made more than 7. I know Jay Leno's got one. Beyond that, I don't know where the other, whatever, half a dozen or dozen are. And I'm looking all the time for them. So if anybody sees one, by all means, point it my way, and I will do my best to get it into the garage here, but I can't make any promises. So anyways, my number 6 car is I guess it's 09 to 13 C6 RS. Like in the last top 5 video, I thought I'd throw another unattainable car in the mix, and this one's different. This is not unattainable because it costs too much or they only made a half a dozen like the C6 RS. This one is my own car from high school. In high school, just some backstory. In high school, I started work at 13. I worked as a busboy at 13, washed dishes, all your basic teenage jobs for the early 90s. And I got fixated even then on, my first car. And so I had it in my head that my dad was going to buy me. Why I had it in my head, I have no idea. But I had in my head that my dad was going to buy me a car for my birthday. And so I woke up on my birthday and looked into the driveway, and there was, of course, nothing there. What I did get for my birthday, though, was a shaving kit, which is super awesome and much less expensive. So I began a regime to make my dad ultimately get me a car. And what that turned into, though, was working at this busboy job and other jobs to save up the money. And I had my heart set on a 5.0 Mustang, specifically a Mustang GT. And this is back in the time of Vanilla Ice. I'm not embarrassed to say it. And but I think I like the 5.0s even before Ice Ice Baby came out. That was kind of just it was a reaffirmation that they were cool, I guess. Anyway, I worked and saved and pleaded and begged and got the best grades that I could, and in every way that a 17-year-old kid tries to convince their parents, I did. And my dad never said, "Okay, we're gonna get this car," but he began to soften, and we did go to look at a car um, in '91, and it was a '91, and on the lot. And I remember the sticker was 15.5, and I had saved up almost 5,000 bucks. And so just like imagine that for a sec for today's kids. I mean, the 5.0 was, I mean, just take a 5.0 Mustang today. I don't know what they cost, but I guarantee you that a kid working as a busboy would take him a long time to save up a third nearly of the purchase price. But I had saved up a third, and that was enough for my dad to get over the hump and um, and commit, and he did. And it was funny because I did not know that as an underaged person, I was like 17 at the time, that your parents could and they can essentially dip into your bank account whenever they feel like it just by showing that they're your parents. And so I went to the bank one day to check my balance, and it was zero because my dad had showed up the day before to withdraw all my money so that he had it to go get this car. Fast forward a bit, got the car, and this is in fall of '91. Got the car, loved it, drove it, modified it. Nothing too crazy, more stereo stuff than performance stuff. Although I did all your basic performance mods, pulleys, and timing advance, and anything we knew at that point in time as idiot kids. Um, had the car through my freshman year of college, but began, like I mentioned in other videos, began to kind of fall out of the car scene because I was kind of focused on college at the time, and ultimately sold the car. And this is another side story too. If you're ever going to have your kid sell a car, coach them first. We had listed the car for 12. I'm not even sure. It was some number, and we had a guy and his son come and look at it, and they threw out, call it, if we had set it for 12, they threw out 10. And this 18, 19-year-old me was unprepared for this negotiation level because my dad did not prepare me. And luckily, I rebutted with probably a 10.5 or something like that. So it was some menial amount more, but at least it was something as opposed to like, okay. And I sold the car for, call it 10.5. Um, it then I forgot about it, of course, as we all do on these cars. And it made its way out of Michigan here into Florida, possibly other states. I pulled the Carfax, and I may even post the Carfax. I probably will in the description because I want to find this car. And I think it ended its life in the Gainesville, Florida area, and I assume it is in a junkyard there somewhere. But I would take it nonetheless. To this day, I'm looking for that car. To be fair, I haven't looked vehemently for it. I haven't spent a ton of energy. Um, and I don't care what condition it's in. I would love to have it regardless if it was a hunk of metal. So if anybody's watching in the Gainesville, Florida area and feels like going to any of the junkyards and looking for this, I'll post the Carfax, which will have the VIN. And if anybody finds it, I'm happy to pay a reward. Um, but this is one of my unattainable cars that I've been looking for a bit and would love to get my hands on again. So 1991, it was a white Mustang GT. And I'm sure it's lived a hard life after me, but regardless, I wouldn't mind giving it a home here in the garage for the rest of its life, or at least the rest of my life. Again, thanks for watching, you guys. Sorry we took so long between this video and the last.